Welcome everyone, I am Loren Kocillari and I'm currently doing a postdoc at the Italian Institute of Technology based in Rovereto. Today I will discuss the Widened Pipe Model of xylem conduits, which is a project that I started at the University of Padua during my PhD studies, under the supervision of Professor Amos Maritan. The aim of the study was to investigate the variation of the conduit cross-sectional area as a function of the distance from the stem tip. Now the study has completed and you may find more information in this reference here. More in particular, we aimed to address the following question. So what is the xylem's conduits profile tip to base? Answering that question is very important because xylem conduits transport water in plants, and water transport through plants is a key driver of the carbon and other biochemical cycles and is a crucial link in plant adaptation to climate and vegetation response to climate change. The water transportation in plants occurs in this way. So plants absorb water from the soil through the root hairs and it channels into the small and thin conduits called the xylems. Xylems are these thin tubes that are formed by dead cells piled upon each other, and this occurs for the entire length of the tree, going through the trunk, through the branches until the leaves. So these small and thin conduits allow the water transportation throughout the entire tree. And based on the cohesion and adhesion mechanism, the water is able to go from the soil to the leaves. And at the leaves, it happens that some pores will be open and the fluid will transpirate. All this process happens because of the water potential gradient, which is at the order of 100 megapascal. Previous models predicted that conduits widen tip to base as power laws. These models employ the branching structure as shown in this cartoon, where for a given layer denoted by K, the radius of the xylem is fixed, is constant. By increasing the number of layers, the radius of the xylem decreases, and in this way these studies achieved the tapering of the xylem conduits. By subsequent studies employed further and introduced additional hypotheses and parameters, but all these studies show the following shortcomings. They typically introduce a large number of hypotheses and model parameters. They also use the branching structure, which is a gross approximation of the reality. And they use some untested assumptions, such as, for example, the Da Vinci rule, which has not been empirically confirmed yet. And finally, they do not agree on the widening exponents. Typically, this ranges between 0.2 and 0.5. In our study, we propose a very general mathematical framework of the variation of the vessel diameter as a function of the distance from the stem tip. And this framework is so general that it can be applicable in principle to any kind of vascular terrestrial plants. And this model does not rely on any branching architecture. It considers the vessels as continuously widening tip to base, and each of them are independent tubes. In the cartoon, you can see a pair of examples of the widening profile of the vessel diameter as a function of the distance from the stem tip. Our general theory is based on the Pareto optimization approach, which invokes the trade-off between two opposing and essential evolutionary drivers, such as the resistance cost on one hand, called R, and affects the conductance efficiency, and the widening cost on the other hand, W, which affects the carbon cost and the cavitation risk. So we postulated that plants should have a widening profile in their conduit xylem conduits that would minimize simultaneously both the two costs, such as the resistance and the widening cost. The resistance can be extracted from this formula by the ratio between the pressure drop and the volume flow rate. And the resistance will depend on 1 over radius at the fourth. On the other side, as regarding the cavitation risk, it is due to the fact that for very wide xylems, the probability to have bubbles of air inside each xylem is very high. And in the case where the bubbles will appear, then the xylems will shrink and the water will not fill anymore. So it is very dangerous to have wide xylems. But the trade-off is this, because the resistance will decrease for very wide xylems, but for very wide xylems you will have a high cavitation risk. On the contrary, if you decrease the cavitation risk by building a small, very thinner xylems, conduits, then you have, on the contrary, that the resistance will decrease a lot. So the resistance cost can be given by the following formula, which is valid for generic pipes of circular cross-sections. Mu corresponds to the fluid viscosity, K to some constant related to the circular cross-section, and the total resistance cost can be estimated after integrating the infinitesimal elements of infinitesimal pipes with length dh and width 1 over sigma squared, and integrating from h0, which is the nearest distance from the stem tip, until the base of the tree. As regarding the widening cost, we can formulate it as the integral of a given generic functional of the first derivative of the cross-section. And it is very convenient to formulate in this way because the widening cost is proportional to some discontinuity, and if the discontinuity is very important, then this function will capture it. And by expanding in a series of powers of the first derivatives of the cross-section, then we can build our model by considering the first elements. For example, considering this term here it is trivial because it will lead to the difference in cross sections from the basis and at the basis of the tree and at the tip of the tree. So we considered only this second element, which is not trivial, but in principle we could add more complexity in our model. But we wanted the basic and fundamental model that is able to capture the complexity in the data. So we built the model, the cost function, given by the linear combination of the resistance cost and the widening cost, which results in a Lagrangian. And the optimal solution of this Lagrangian is the following equation, which is the profile of the xylem as a function of the distance h from the stem tip. Hm corresponds to the total height, while sigma m corresponds to the cross-section at the basis of the tree for each individual trees. One remarkable property of our analytical prediction is that it results in a universal widening profile of xylems. And this can be shown with a plot by plotting the analytical prediction in the red curve in the rescaled space of sigma over sigma m and h over hm. And in this space, the model is able to capture the distribution in data, which is depicted by these black error bars representing 3 standard deviations from the mean. As another prediction from our theory, we were able to analytically derive the Pareto front which is the ensemble of all the optimal solutions which are able to solve the multi-objective optimization problem. And the Pareto front in the log-log scale is an inverse relationship between the resistance and the widening costs. J corresponds to some term which is proportional very weakly to the HM, the ratio between the HM and H0. The green line of the Pareto front correspond to those solutions which are optimal because there are no other solutions by definition that outperform them simultaneously for both the objective functions omega and w. As expected from analytical prediction, we found the Pareto front also in data. Each data point corresponds to an individual tree for which we calculated the resistance and the widening costs, and we plotted them in the double logged space. And it results that all trees are clustered in line corresponding to the Pareto front, and tracheids are clustered with a higher resistance and widening profile, while the rest of the trees are found elsewhere in the Pareto front. So just to conclude, we use the Pareto optimization approach to derive an exact closed form solution of the universal tip-to-base conduit widening profile. This analytical solution optimizes both the competing requirements of the minimization transport resistance on one hand and of the carbon cost and the embolism risk on the other. This analytical prediction of the xylem universal profile is in a very good accord with empirical data that we collected across terrestrial plant orders, life forms, and habitats. So I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm very happy to answer to your questions during the conference.